Welcome back, everyone. We are on episode 3 of BIF Bites. I'm your host, Jerry, joined as always by my co-host, Mike. How's it going, Mike?
It's going well, Jerry. I think we need to come up with some morning drive time nicknames. I'm thinking Jam and Jerry might be good.
Mike the Freak. I like it.
Well, I was thinking Mikey Mike, but I think that was already used.
Already taken, yeah.
Yeah, so I'll have to come up with something else.
We'll brainstorm that later.
All right, but now I'm good to be back at BIF Bites. I'm excited about our guest today. This is our first guest in BIF Bites, so that's pretty cool.
I know, right? So first of all, I just wanted to say we've been getting some great feedback about the show, so wanted to just thank all the listeners who have been writing in. It's been great. It's actually been funny, Mike. I don't know about you, but I've been getting, when I've been talking to our Bryant students, I've been starting to get, hey, aren't you that guy from the podcast? So
yeah, podcast man, that's you.
Yeah, worst superhero ever. But yeah, just wanted to thank everyone who's sent in all the kind words. Also, special thanks to Rudy, who actually sent in a list of topics for us to cover in the future, as well as a couple other students who have as well. And actually, our question of the day is inspired by one of Rudy's requests to cover charitable gifts. But yeah, as you said, Mike, we have an awesome guest. I'm really excited to have Gary Wedge from New Age Advisors on the cast. Welcome, Gary.
All right. The crowd goes wild outside the studio.
I'm glad to be here. Thank you for inviting me on episode 3. Hey, I just want to know, are you guys wearing matching sweaters?
We are wearing our matching sweaters. We have our recording sweaters that it's become tradition already.
It's important, you know.
It is. But yeah, Gary, thanks for coming on. I thought you would be great to come on to give some perspective, because when this episode comes out, it's going to be about one short month before the November exam takes place. Yep. And Gary, I know you know the CFP exam all too well. You are one of our former students who successfully passed the exam. You and I actually worked a lot together. We did talk a lot, go over test questions, go over concepts. And I think we developed a good little friendship over the year that you were studying.
For sure, absolutely. Couldn't agree more. It was a long process, but it was a good process because I learned a lot of things and formed some really good relationships. So
yeah, definitely. And I personally, I learned a lot from you, Gary, about just the perspective of the student, the perspective of taking the exam, what you're thinking about, what your mindset is. And I just wanted to have you on the cast to share that, because I think you have a lot of great advice for our students who are still going through the process.
Definitely. Yep.
Yes, sure. You know, you're right. I mean, I did have a lot of things running through my mind as I went through, not just the curriculum at Bryant, which I think is great and moves very quickly, but the exam prep, the review, which for me was Brett Dacko, and for others on the call, they may or may not elect to use Brett's program. They may do something different, but that's really beside the point, because we all have to face the same exam. And there's a lot of challenges that come along with that as a student, especially if you've been practicing a while. I think that was an area that was really hard for me to move away from a little bit and put myself in the position of a student and not a practitioner. Because what we see in the real world and, compared to what is being tested, sometimes are two different things, or we can put our, practitioner spin on things. And if you're not careful, that can take you down a road you don't want to go.
Yeah, that's a great point.
Well, yeah, we're definitely going to get into all of that. But before we get too deep, I want to warm us up, guys, with our question of the episode. You two ready?
For sure.
Bring it on, Jerry.
All right. So, Mr. and Mrs. Owens, a lovely couple, they want to make a gift to a private university. Their AGI is $300,000, and they own a variety of assets. Which of the following assets will produce the largest income tax deduction this year? A, stock bought 2 years ago for $130,000, which is now worth $150,000. A painting bought 5 years ago for $50,000, now worth $150,000. Stock bought 6 years ago for $30,000, now worth $150,000. Or finally, stock bought 2 years ago for $180,000, now worth $100,000.
Wow.
A lot going on there.
I know. Couple things going on. So Gary, from the student's point of view, you get this question on the test. What's going through your head right away as when you see a question like this?
As with any question, the first thing I'm looking at is what is the concept, right? Before I even get into the question, I'm looking for the concept. What is the board testing me on, right? Is this an estate question? Is this a tax planning question? So I want to find the concept. Then I want to say, okay, this is going to be an income tax question, right? Because we're talking about saving some taxes. So now I kind of know where the board wants my mind, right? And now I'm looking at the question and I'm reading the question. This is key. Read the question.
RTFQ.
Question says, what's the largest income tax deduction, right? They don't want to know anything other than that. You shouldn't be focusing on any other aspect of this question other than what answer is going to produce the largest income tax deduction. So now I've identified the concept and I've read the question so I know clearly what they're asking me to do or asking me what to answer within the concept. Now I'm looking at my answer choices, okay? And I got 4, and usually you can whittle them down to 2 pretty easily. I always look for the painting one first. When a student goes through the curriculum and their review course, they will spend some time on the painting concept because this is a use unrelated. So it didn't say that it was going to be, put in a museum or, donated to the art college at a university. So this is use unrelated. So it's going to have to be valued at basis. Okay. Yeah. So I know pretty much right away that one now comes off the table. Okay. So now I'm down to 3.
I would say real quick, Gary, whenever I see a painting in a question, that's a huge red flag for me because the CFP board loves to use the painting example with these types of questions.
Couldn't agree more, and that's why I go to it first because the board likes to use it as a trip-up question. And if it doesn't say anything in there about going to a museum or, donated to the art department, if that information is missing, it's an easy kill. You can scratch that right off.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think you're right. The painting is easy to rule out because use versus not use. We'll come back to that a little later because I think that's an interesting topic that we can expand on a bit. But yes, definitely with the lost property, that's a big red flag. They are losing $80,000 on this stock already. If they donate it, all that's doing is locking in that loss, and it's not actually that great of a deal. Especially the big red flag for me is that the stock's now worth $100,000, and even if you didn't know, I'm so on charities. Is it the basis? Is it the fair market value? I don't really know. Even if you don't know, both the basis and the fair market value of option A is higher than the value of the stock worth $100,000. So even there, you should be able to eliminate option D as just being a wrong answer. What's your take, Mike?
Yeah, I agree with that. To always be suspect of the lost property. And as Gary said, the unrelated drives that down to just one choice, the basis with a cap at 50% of AGI. I like this question from a CFP exam standpoint because there's a lot going on and you have to evaluate multiple types of property real quickly. The first thing I looked at in this question was the 300,000 AGI. So the top end is going to be 50% of that. If I don't have any cash, I scanned these answer choices very quickly to see if there's any cash involved because the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act increased the threshold for cash to 60%. AGI, but we don't have any. So my top end possible here is going to be 50% AGI, and then I would dive in and take apart these answers just as you guys have on the first couple.
Right. Yeah. Real quick on that point. So remember, folks, when you're seeing charitable donation questions, cash is king. Cash gets the added benefit because it's cold hard cash. You can deduct up to 60% of AGI versus assets, which is a max of 50% of AGI.
Yeah, and I think the other thing to watch out for on these questions, because it's not as apparent in this one, just with the way it's worded and the actual numbers we're using, but you have to remember that when you're donating stock, or if the client's donating stock, that they always reserve the right to do so at basis, and you can't forget that. Okay, if you go right for the AGI exclusion, you may miss it because it may be a better deal for the client to make that donation at basis. And that's exactly, what's happening here in this question, because when we look at answer A and you're like, if I donate that stock, at basis, I'm going to be able to have a full deduction of $130,000 on that. Whereas if I go down to the answer C there, the stock I bought 6 years ago, that's $90,000, which is pretty nice, but it's not $130,000. But you had to go at basis on answer 1 to make that work out.
Right. Yeah, having it at the basis of $130,000 keeps it under the $150,000 cap, because remember, their AGI is $300,000. 50% of that is $150,000. So that right there is our hard cap starting point. No matter what, our answer is not going to be higher than $150,000.
And I think that's, just to play on what Mike said, there's a lot going on in these types of questions. And so as a recent student, I looked for the concept, and then I looked for, the what are they asking within that concept. And then I went into the answers, and then you're not done, because now you got to think about these rules. You got to think about these limitations, and you got just over 2 minutes to do it, folks. So you really, if this is an area that you find is a struggle in your studies, you need to commit some time to this. I can't promise you that this question will show up on your exam, but it could. And it could show up more than once. And so you have to be prepared to deal with it.
Yeah, those are good points. And I think this is a good illustration of a topic like so many in income tax and estate planning is as we study, we want to master the basics first. What are my big picture elements that go on with charitable giving? So we want to know about the 50%. We want to know about the 30%. For intangibles, just some of those basic rules, and not worry about every little exception and nuance that's contained in the code.
Yeah. Can you actually speak on that for a second, Mike? So I think we kind of went over that quickly, and I think students who haven't really got to this part of their studies yet might have missed it. Why is the stock bought 6 years ago for $30,000 now worth $150,000? Why is that not the correct answer compared to the correct answer, which is option A, stock bought 2 years ago for $130,000 now worth $150,000?
Sure, and that relates to the point that Gary just made, that there's a choice when we're donating appreciated long-term capital gain property. Then the donor has the choice to value that property at fair market value, with the cap then being for the deduction 30% of AGI. And if they make the choice to value the property at basis, then the cap to the AGI is 50%.
Right. So there's two limits going on here, and I feel this is where students get confused all the time. The 50% of AGI is your hard overall cap. The most you can deduct is 50% of your AGI. Now, for this specific property, this stock, if we were going to do the fair market value, the cap is 30% of our AGI for this specific stock.
If they choose fair market value. Mm-hmm.
Correct. If they choose fair market value, with the alternative, as Gary pointed out, being if they don't want to choose fair market value, they can instead choose the basis, which most people end up doing if the basis ends up being higher than the fair market value or 30% of the fair market value, which in this case, they would have only got a $90,000 deduction if they had gone for 30% of AGI compared to the $130,000 deduction by choosing the basis option.
Exactly. And that's why it's such a good question, because you had to go one more layer to determine, well, I'm really better off using basis on this one and taking that 50% AGI. So we're looking at how is the property valued? How's that impact the cap on the AGI?
So here comes the test tip, Jerry.
Let's hear it, Gary. What is it?
All right, students, take your pencils out. I don't want to say it's a shortcut, but this will help you. As soon as you see the long-term capital gains property, that's usually going to be stock. Doesn't have to be, but it's usually going to be stock. Do yourself a favor and write down both the AGI and the basis for those answers. So you'll see what you can deduct under AGI, and you'll see what you can deduct under basis, okay? Otherwise, it gets really easy to go automatically to AGI when basis would have been the better play, which is clearly the illustration here. And I would go so far as to say that's really what the board is testing you here. They're testing you to see if you recognize that basis not only can be used, but should be used in this example.
Now, before we move on for this, I just want to go down kind of a alternate reality with this question, because it's a variation on this question that we see a lot. Let's say instead of gifting it to their university, Mr. and Mrs. Owens instead want to gift it to the Museum of Fine Arts. What would be the better option in that case if they decide to make this gift to a museum instead of a university?
Well, now I think, aren't we not talking about use related?
Right.
We are.
And use related is going to have the same options that actually the long-term capital gain property would have. And that would be 30% using fair market value. That would be the cap on the AGI, or 50% using basis. So it changes the game here.
Right. And that painting all of a sudden now becomes a somewhat more valid answer, because a painting now is going to be used by the museum, whereas the university is probably just going to take that painting and sell it. So at most you can get is just the basis for the painting, because the university is just going to sell it. But if it instead goes to a museum, now you have a lot more options with that painting, since they can choose to display the painting and actually use it for its actual value.
Yeah, for sure. I think that's, again, when you see these questions, you're going to see almost always there's the painting answer. And really, it's a quick exercise in, hey, is this use related or it's not? And I'll tell you, if you don't see it on the exam, you will see it in your prep materials. And they'll say it's donated to a university, like Jerry just pointed, and that's not good enough. Okay, it would have to say the art department and the university. Okay, if it just says university, to Jerry's point, they could just end up selling it. At that point, it'd be valued at basis.
Yeah, and sometimes you might get an extra mean one. I've seen some real tricky ones, like donating antique furniture to a retirement home. When you get into that, it's just like, well, are they going to use it? Maybe, maybe not. Maybe they're going to sell the antique furniture. So it ended up being with that question, it was not use related, because the retirement home is probably not going to put like an antique cuckoo clock in their waiting room or anything like that, like a $20,000 cuckoo clock.
Yeah, I'm glad I didn't get that one. There is one more wrinkle in this one, though, that I thought was interesting, related to that stock purchased at 180 and now valued at 100,000. Normally the default, like you guys said straight up, was sell it and take the loss and do something else. And that proves to be the better choice here. One could do this, though. They could sell that, get their 100,000, give the 100,000 to the university, take a charitable deduction of 60% of that 100,000, and then claim a loss of 80,000, a long-term capital loss. But then they'd have to nibble away at that at no more than $3,000 a year.
Right.
And it's going to take them forever to recover that. So the best choice would be the one that we all three came down to. Yeah, that's great advice. And the other thing with this was, at the very end of the question, it says produce the largest deduction this year. So if I had some way to carry over these losses over the next, 10, 15 years, not going to count in this question because we were only analyzing this year.
Yeah, I was gonna actually point that out to you, Mike, and then you came back around and got that. Basically, answer D only has a chance of being possible if the question is stated in such a way where carry forward is going to be an option. But even then, there's that whole time value in there, and there's almost always just a better answer than selling something at a loss and just carrying it forward forever.
Good stuff. All right, Gary. So now let's get into the meat and potatoes of why we had you on today. Gary, you ended up taking the exam a total of 3 times.
I did.
So I feel you have some great insight on not just what works to help you pass the exam, but also what doesn't work. And I was hoping you could, speak to that a little bit and share some advice with our students about, what you learned from your first 2 attempts, what your big takeaways were and what you changed in order to be successful in that 3rd attempt on the exam.
Sure. Well, I think it's a lot of things, and I think for most people that have had to retake the exam more than, once or twice, they would agree it's kind of a series of things. I think the first time I took the exam, I wasn't ready, so I would start by letting students know right up front that if you feel for any reason that you're just not going to be where you think you need to be on exam day, then you need to be aware of what the CFP Board's policy is for canceling your enrollment, and those rules are posted on their website, so do look them up if you feel like you kind of need to bail on this, because I wouldn't encourage anybody to go in unprepared. This is not an exam that you can go into without being on top of your game. So rule number 1, make sure you're ready for the exam. I don't feel like I was ready. I made it through the education component. I did well on the capstone, and I did have some time for the review, but I didn't have as much as I would like. And in hindsight, because I finished capstone in May, and then I sat for the July exam. In hindsight, I would have waited for the November exam, and there's no harm or foul in waiting to do to the later.
Yeah, and you finished in like late May too, if I remember.
I did. Well, I finished the capstone on about May 13th, so I mean there was some time. But I think I moved through the education component pretty quickly. I put in a lot of study. And I was probably ready I probably should have had a little bit of a break in between the completion of my education and the start of my review. Okay, I think I could have benefited from a little break, just a couple of weeks maybe, just to kind of reorganize. But no, I went right from the education right into the exam prep, and it was a real grind. And some people can do that, others can't. If you're a student that thinks, hey, I'm not that way either, that doesn't work for me, then just be cognizant of that.
Yeah, that's a big conversation I have with a lot of my students, especially those who finish the capstone on a little bit of the later end of the time frame, and it's really something you can only answer for yourself. I know there's a lot of pressure on students. If I had a nickel every time I heard my boss really wants me to take the exam in X month, I could retire by now. I know there's lots of pressures out there. You want to jumpstart your career. You want to get this designation. You've also been going through the education content for 10 months to a year leading up to this point, and you're just sick of it and you just want to be done with it. I get all of that, but you don't want to rush into this exam.
For sure.
Yeah, I agree. I get real nervous when I have a student that once we get inside, say, 12 weeks, to the exam window and they're still working on the capstone, it makes me really, really nervous because they start to cut corners on getting prepped to go to live review, and that's not a good thing.
Yeah, I think you got to have about a 90-day window there, folks. That's 12 weeks, you know. And if you vote for a review, if you've only got 8 or 10 weeks because you ran over on your capstone, or maybe you fell a little bit behind just during the education component, and you're not quite on target, and now you've only got 8 or 10 weeks. I know the thought is, I'm close enough, and I'll really buckle down. But sometimes there's just no substitute for time. It's just a time issue, folks. You have to have time to learn and practice and let things sink in and have time to think about what you're doing. And that's hard to get all that to come together in 6, 7, 8, 9 weeks. You need that full 12 weeks, I think, to put yourself in the best position to pass on your first attempt.
I agree.
The other thing I probably learned too, about that was, I took the test in the July cycle, and here's how bad things can go for a student who's not prepared. And that is, and Jerry, you'll remember this, the July cycle not long ago, the CFP board, they put out an exam that was just loaded with the calculator questions, okay?
Yes.
And for those of us that got that exam, and I was one of them, it just goes to show how well you need to know the material, okay? In a lot of cases, you see a question once, maybe twice, and in some cases you may not see it at all. But the board reserves the right to just hammer you on a given topic. And it can be the financial calculator. It could be estate, okay? So you really have to be prepared for a tough exam, because it can, and in my case, did happen. So I went in a little unprepared in that July cycle. And on top of that, I got a really tough exam. In fact, I think of all the other students that I talked with who got that exam, I personally didn't talk to any one of them that passed. Jerry, maybe you talked to some of them that passed, but anybody that I talked to, and I made my rounds, and not just with Bryant's students, but I talked with people who went through other programs and had that exam on exam day, and I didn't talk to anybody that passed that. And I don't want to suggest that the CFP board put out a stinker, right? I just think they put out a tough exam that you really had to be prepared for.
Yeah, I do remember that. Because I remember being shocked when you told me that you failed the second time. Because if I had to bet on any student of passing, it would have been you for that exam, Gary, because usually, Mike, I think you can back me up on this. Usually the biggest determiner of success with the exam is putting in the work. And, when I see students, putting in the work, doing the readings, sending me emails, asking me questions, really showing that they care about this material, showing that they care about their success, knowing that they want to do well. Those are the students that almost always pass, in my perspective. It's the students who tell me, oh yeah, I did good on the Series 7. Oh yeah, I've been practicing for 15 years. I don't really need to study. Oh yeah, like I'm a good test taker. Those are the students that I worry the most about. And Gary, you and I think we talked daily for months leading up to the exam.
We probably did. And I think, I would encourage students of Bryant who are going through their material, and especially if they're going to do a exam prep through Brett Danko, through Bryant, that you and Mike and some of the others there are really good resources for this stuff. And you're probably underutilized, although I made you earn your paycheck.
Yeah.
It's, you guys are the experts with respect to the educational, content, because for those of us that have practiced for a long time, we've seen some things. We've got battle scars on our backs to prove it. And so our questions that we have are probably a little bit deeper than maybe somebody who's just new to the industry or or fresh out of college because they're necessarily limited in their experience. So they're going to think in a very kind of a one-dimensional frame of mind, whereas a practitioner who's been at it for a while is going to see things through a lot of different lenses, and it can really take you off. It can take you out of your testing mindset. And part of what you did for me, Jerry, was help to keep me in the zone. Because this really is a marathon. And to your point, the first time I took the test is when I got the calculator question, and then I took the test again that November. And what I'm trying to illustrate to the students here is the domino effect. Okay, this just doesn't get any better when things aren't going right. But things weren't going right from the very beginning. But I pressed on, and it was a little foolish. So because I raced into July, I was unprepared, and then on top of that, I got a difficult exam, and I didn't pass. So what did I do? I immediately prepped for November. I should have done that. I should have done that. I should have taken November off. I should have sat in March, but I didn't. So you can see what's happening here. I took a test in July that I shouldn't have taken, and because I took it, I wasn't successful. And then I should have waited till March, but I didn't. So I took it in November, and guess what? I failed again.
Yep.
So at that point, I'm like, okay, it was me fighting the exam at this point, Jerry.
Right.
It wasn't me not knowing the concepts.
Right, exactly. And that's why in November I was so shocked because, yes, you didn't really have a lot of time for July. That's understandable. You decided to get back on the horse, and that's great. We spent a lot of time working it over, and even though you put in lots and lots of time, you're a very smart individual, you get the concepts, you start getting burnout at that point. You
do. I was working against me more than the exam was working against me. And it took a while for me to figure it out. And I talked with another student who had taken the exam multiple times, and he really helped give me some guidance on some of these things. And I'm going to paraphrase. One of the things he said to me was, hey, as soon as you get to the point where, you stop fighting the exam and you start thinking to yourself, what can I do to be better at, whatever area of the exam that might be a struggle, your growth and your preparation for the exam, you will grow so much once you kind of let go of the fact that the exam is what it is. It's long, it's a grind, it's not easy, but you're not going to change that. So once you accept that and just focus on how can I get better, that's where real progress is made, and that's what I did when I prepped for my third attempt.
Yep, and you actually took a cycle off between November.
I did, because I realized then that I was working against myself. It was Gary against Gary. The exam was not really the issue, and in fact, in November, I felt like I was probably very close to passing. I probably was, but it didn't matter. I had too many things that I was fighting myself on. And I needed to take a break in order to kind of heal from all that. And when I came back in the July cycle of the following year, I was much more prepared. But I put in just as much time, maybe more than I did on the previous cycles. You and I stayed in contact, right?
Oh, yeah.
And I was, I participated in the forums and the boards, and I asked questions. And it's a very active process. You can't be lazy about it, folks. You got to want this. And then once you make the commitment to want it, you got to go get it.
And I think that also speaks to kind of the perseverance needed, because I do speak to a lot of students, and it's really disheartening when I don't know if it's kind of programmed into them or what they have their expectations off, but a lot of students will take this exam, and if they're not successful their first time, they're very, very defeated, and some of them just give up entirely. And it's really heartbreaking to see someone put, 10 months, a year, 14 months of their life into something and not get it on the first try and just give up completely.
So here's my thought on that. Mike, maybe you've got an idea on this too, but I think for younger people coming into the business, the industry, and they haven't had the experience, and they're fresh out of college, so they're kind of in this they're in this rhythm, right, of studying and taking exams. They're kind of still in that wheelhouse. Even if they've been out for even a year or two, they still kind of can get back into things, pretty quickly. And so they feel like if they're not immediately successful, then they did something wrong, or this isn't worth pursuing. I'm going to tell you this, for the younger folks that may be on this podcast, if you're coming into this business with no experience and you're concerned about defeat and not having immediate success, you may want to rethink your career. This is one of the hardest professions in the business, okay, of all businesses, because of just the structure of it. You have to find clients, right? You have to be smart. You have to know what you're doing. You're dealing with people's money and their lives and their planning. It's not an easy job, okay? It takes a lot of time, and you go through periods of time where you lose more than you win. And this is just one of those. The CFP exam is just one of those times where you might lose for a little bit before you win. But to Jerry's point, with perseverance, right, you will win.
I agree with that. I've been telling my students for 13 years now that passing this exam is as much about discipline and perseverance and just intestinal fortitude to keep going as it is about academics. And those who pass figure out how to manage the time and stay dedicated to their study plan. And it's recognizing that coming off of an exam cycle in which we didn't pass, just verbalizing the things that could have been done better is half of the battle to get back in there and correct those patterns for a second or third take. And that's what you did, Gary. But that's the big challenge for anyone. It's not going to get any easier, like you said. But what we can do is manage our time better so that we put in the work, like Jerry's been talking about.
So, with all that's been said, I think it's also very important to talk about pass bias. We were just talking a little bit ago about the mindset of taking the test, being okay with not passing, that a lot of people don't fail. And I think that is something that does not get said enough about the CFP exam. So many people go into this exam thinking it's another FINRA exam, like the Series 7 or the 63, and where like 80% of people pass it on their first time. And if you fail it, you're an absolute failure. And that's just not the case. I feel not enough gets said about the number of people that really have to take this exam multiple times.
Yeah, I agree with that. And that adds to that feeling of being defeated or deflated, like Gary was talking about. If you read about all this, I passed and, it was the greatest thing in the world. And you start to beat yourself up even more as you read that. But you're right. I mean, I off the top of my head, I want to say the highest pass rate ever was maybe 70 or thereabouts, but it's often closer to 60, which means that's about 40% that didn't pass. And the pass rate for second and third time exam takers is even lower. So you have to be aware of that.
Right. Lots and lots of people don't pass it their first or even second time, and that's totally fine. And Gary here is living proof that, taking it 3 times is not any shame, not any big deal. Sometimes it's 3 times a charm.
Yeah, really. At the end of the day, folks, you just have to want this. And look, I mean, since I passed the exam, and even before the exam, I now talk with a lot of students privately, and they come and go on the CFP Board Forum. They inquire to me all the time, kind of what my thoughts are about being successful, because I think they know that, with repetitive test taking comes some experience. And, the statistics are great and all that as far as the exam is concerned. But the reality is, my thought is, the second and third time, we know the second or third time passer, tends to pass at a lower rate than even first timers. But I think that just depends on the individual. There's a lot of people, to Jerry's point earlier, they just get burned out and they just say, you know what, forget it. I'm not gonna. This is too hard. I'm not gonna continue to pursue this. And so you really wonder if on that second or third attempt, you're really seeing their best effort. Okay, I think for those that have to take it a second or a third time, but remain committed to the study process and diligent, you can ignore all that, because you're going to pass. Okay, you're going to pass. because you put in the time and effort and you remain diligent. So I don't think those statistics tell the whole story is what I'm getting at.
Yeah. And I also want to talk about, you mentioned the forums, the pass bias on the forum, because we talked a lot about this back in the day, Gary. I remember you getting kind of down on yourself because, you know, you would look at the CFP Board Forum right after the exam took place and you would just see thread after thread after thread of I passed, I'm so excited, I passed, like thread after thread of just people congratulating themselves. And, you know, that's great for those people. They worked hard. They definitely want to show it off. But I think if you weren't one of the people who've passed and you didn't get that pass when you hit submit on the exam, not to take that personally, because like we talked about a lot, Gary, no one's rushing to the CFP board to say I failed.
No, or to say that they've taken it a third or fourth time. But I will tell you this, students on the call today, I've had so many people, just since I have passed the exam, reach out to me privately and say, hey, Gary, this is my third or fourth attempt. And you know what? You just never see those threads in the forum because, to Jerry's point, they're just, people aren't running out to air that laundry. But I want everybody to know that they are very much among us, and you may be one of them. I was, and it's okay because it worked out in the end because I remained committed to the process. And if you do that, you will pass. It might take you, you might get it the first time. You might get it the second time. You might get it the third. I don't personally know anybody that's taken it 5 times, but I've talked with several people that have taken it 4 times, and they passed. Now, nobody wants to have to go through this 4 times. But the point is, regardless of how many times you have to go through it, if you remain diligent, you will be successful.
Yeah, I think you mentioned that to me, Gary, that you were one of the few people who posted on the forum, hey, I just want to be honest, I failed, here's what I did. And I think you told me that you got a bunch of people messaging you just saying, you know, what a relief it was seeing someone actually get out there and, you know, not be embarrassed and put it out there and say, yeah, this is something that happens. It's okay. You know, here's how we try and be better.
Yeah. You know, the other big interesting thing with that too, Jerry, has been, and for those of you that are contemplating doing an exam preparation course with specifically Brett Vaco, because Brett talks about this in his training, and that is, Mr. MBA and CPA and, that whole group, right? And it's been very interesting how privately those folks have come to me and said, "Hey, I'm on my third shot here." So I always share with people, I'm mid-career. Okay, I'm mid-career in this business. My undergrad is in economics out of Michigan State University, Big Ten College. Yeah, the whole deal, right? And I'm an RIA, own my own practice, have for years. Okay, have all the licenses. I don't have a FINRA affiliation anymore, but back in the day I did. So I've taken all those exams. Okay, I know what those are all about, and so I've been around and I'm very experienced. And it took me 3 times to get through it. And so we hear sometimes people say, "Oh, I'm all set. I got an MBA or I'm a JD." I will tell you, I have several of those folks private messaging me now. Hey, I'm a JD. I'm an MBA. Taking this thing twice, I can't get past it. It doesn't matter that you're an MBA or a JD, okay? What matters is committing to the process and giving it your all. And I'm convinced that if you do that, you're going to pass.
Yeah. And that also speaks, I wanted to mention, I don't think we've talked about it yet, but the CFP Board Forum is a great resource for networking with other students. Anyone listening who is planning on getting their CFP, if you have not already, I would highly recommend you go and make a profile on the CFP Board Forum, because it's a great resource the CFP Board puts out for students to kind of network with people who, pass like Gary did, or who are still in the process, or, have been in the industry for years and just like helping people out. There's a lot of great stuff on the forum. You just got to be careful of that kind of pass bias we talked about earlier. Keep in mind the people who are posting might not necessarily be representative of the CFP board students as a whole.
For sure.
Yeah, and be careful about taking any one person's advice as the gospel to passing this, because we have to wrap this around our best practices for how we learn, how we study, how we read, and not just say, oh, well, so-and-so said all they did was practice questions and they passed. That alone is very dangerous advice because we don't know their baseline. We don't know how many times they've taken it. We don't know what else they've studied in their career. We don't know how long they've been in the business. There might have been such a huge baseline to start with that really all they did need was some practice questions, but that's not the case with most of us that step into that exam. So be very, very careful thinking you've found the Holy Grail in that forum, but yet take the best of what you hear that you know can work with your style and the time periods that you're best at studying at. Is it 2 hours at a time, 3, 4? All of that's got to come from you and then manage it.
Yeah, I would say use the CFP Board Forum as a resource to get lots and lots of opinions and then filter it out from there. Don't just find one person and say, okay, this is who I'm going with.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. In fact, I've been on the board forums for, years now, Jerry.
Yeah.
It's interesting because, folks, a lot of people will come into that forum and they're just going to come and go like Monday afternoon, right? That's just what they're going to do. But I think you'll find if you spend some time in there, there's a couple old birds in there, myself included. Rob's a big resource there. Rob and I are posting in there all the time. And, Rob's relatively new to financial services, and he's on the path to CFP certification, so he's passed the exam, but he's still wrapping up his experience. And Rob took the exam twice, and he went through Dalton both times. And so everybody's, to Mike's point, everybody's walk is just different. I mean, this idea that if you take, Brett's class or Ken Zahn's class or Dalton, that those are the Holy Grail, it's not. Those are all quality programs, and I think the underlying, concept there is that it's probably advantageous for you to enroll in something that's quality to help move you through this process. But to Jerry's point, you use the board because there's a few of us out there that have passed the exam after multiple attempts. We've got a lot of years of experience. We run our own practices. We manage our clients. We manage investments. We do planning. And we can really, shed some light on what are otherwise sometimes kind of gray areas for somebody who's maybe, new to the business or new to the path of pursuing CFP certification.
Definitely. And also one more point I just wanted to make about the forum before we start to wrap up here is careful with, so a lot of people who have recently passed the exam kind of use the CFP Board Forum as a sort of yard sale almost, and use it to sell off a lot of their study materials they had. And you can find a lot of great stuff in there. You can definitely find some gems and diamonds in the rough there, but you got to be really careful because keep in mind the CFP exam's constantly changing. And especially during certain time frames, like with the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act and that big change, and then for actually November exam with the introduction of the fiduciary rules, a lot of that information tends to go out of date fairly quickly. So if you are going to be looking for exam prep materials and getting some resources on there and buying someone's used study materials, just make sure, buyer beware, make sure that what you're buying is actually up to date and will actually help you and not hurt you when you take the exam.
Good point.
Yeah, quick comment on that, actually, Jerry. Here again, I'm amazed when I see these fire sales because, look, students, you've already put in a lot of investment of money and time to get to a point where you're ready to pursue, taking the exam. Why would you compromise your potential success with outdated materials or materials that aren't fully up to the latest, laws and rules and regulations? That's point number one. Point number two is this is not CFP certification, and the role of being a certified financial planner is not something you achieve and then sell books and forget about it and go back to, selling variable annuities. Okay, that's not what we're doing here. I kept my books. Why did I keep my books? Why would I do that? Because you know what? Even after all the years that I've practiced, sometimes I'm not clear on something. And those books are fine for me to go back and refresh on a concept because at that point, I don't need the numbers to necessarily be, accurate, right? But I need to revisit a concept. Like a week ago, I had somebody come in with a Roth 457. I've been practicing.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, I've been practicing. I've seen that like twice.
Yeah.
Okay? Yeah, I'm not ashamed to admit that I went and picked up my, book from Bryant, and brushed up on that, because sometimes there's something that comes across your office or desk that you don't see it enough to stay super proficient at it, okay? And you have to refer, and these are great reference books. So I would encourage you just keep them.
I agree. I use mine every day.
Well, awesome. This has been a blast. Gary, thank you again for coming on. It was
Thank you.
Great having you on. Yeah, it was great
Gary.
catching up with you. Great catching up. Great having you here. And thanks so much for sharing all your
Sure,
advice.
I'd love to do it again.
Yeah, definitely. We'll have you on. Maybe we can get some listener feedback of maybe some questions that Mike and I didn't even think to ask you that, might be burning on the tips of some students' tongues. And we can do a follow-up for one of the next exam cycles.
Sure, and in the meantime, they can find me on the forums.
Definitely.
Good
Yeah,
point.
you are all over those forums. Before we go, I just wanted to come out with some quick announcements we got. Go subscribe to our YouTube page at Boston Institute of Finance on YouTube. We've been really kicking up the gear on releasing more calculator videos and tutorial videos on there. I think this week we're coming out with an amortization calculator video, which has been something students have been asking a lot for. Basically, how to amortize mortgage loans using the financial calculators. If you have trouble with those calculations, I know, Gary, that was something you and I worked a lot on. We're coming out with more resources. I think, Gary, actually, you were probably one of the first proponents telling us to get, videos, more interactive ways to learn about these, pretty difficult calculations.
And you guys responded. I thought originally the Bryant program was a little light on the calculator, but you and Brendan and many others on the team, you took that to heart, and you really filled in a lot of those holes, and that's good, because folks, you need to know your calculator. You do.
Definitely. So coming out with more videos all the time. New one going up this week. Make sure you kind of subscribe to the YouTube page. That way you get notified whenever we come out with a new video. And then if you like what you hear, give us a review on iTunes or whatever you're listening to this podcast. How we can get this podcast in front of more students and checking it out. So if you like it, definitely give it a nice review. And if you really like it and you're thinking about getting your CFP designation, feel free, enroll in the Bryant CFP program, and you can talk to Mike and I all the time. Right, Mike?
Yeah. Well, and along those lines, to any of our listeners and students, if you have some ideas on things you think would be helpful to have some type of tutorial video, please send those in, just like you send ideas for the podcast. We'd be happy to entertain your list of video requests.
Yeah, definitely. Especially now that we have videos already for most of the basic stuff, most of the kind of like bread and butter type calculations. Now we're going to start looking into making videos for some of the more complex topics. Mm-hmm. So
yep.
If there's a topic you want covered sooner rather than later, definitely let us know about it. Awesome. Well, thanks so much, guys, for joining us. I had a blast. Hope you guys did too. And good luck, everyone, with your studies.
Talk to you soon. Thanks so much, Gary, for being the guest, and Jerry for another good episode.